What happens when a fatal shooting becomes more than just a tragedy? Well, in Minneapolis, it's turned into a full-blown battleground. And this fight isn't just about what happened, it's about who gets to control the truth itself.
Okay, so there's one thing that absolutely everyone agrees on. A 37-year-old woman, Renee Good, was shot and killed in Minneapolis by a federal agent from ICE. That's the one solid fact. But right after that, the story just shatters. It splits into two totally different, conflicting realities. And that brings us to the real heart of this whole thing, right? When you have the feds saying one thing and the state and local guys saying something completely different, who's in charge? I mean, who gets to control the investigation? Who talks to the witnesses? Who holds the evidence? And, who ultimately gets to decide what the truth is?
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll lay out the basic facts of the shooting. Then, we'll get into those two clashing stories, the federal government's side and Minnesota's very strong pushback. From there, we'll see how this disagreement exploded into a fight over the investigation itself. And finally, we'll talk about why it matters so much who comes out on top. All right, let's start with what we actually know for sure. What are the bedrock facts of what went down that Wednesday in Minnesota?
So you've got two main people here, Renee Good and a federal ICE agent who hasn't been named. And the event, of course, was a fatal shooting. But, and this is really important, this didn't just happen out of the blue. It all went down while hundreds of ICE agents were in Minneapolis for a White House crackdown on illegal immigration. So you can imagine, the city was already on edge. The atmosphere was tense, to say the least.
And boom, right here is where the story just splits wide open. We're getting into the real mess of it now. How one single event could lead to two stories that just cannot both be true.
Just look at the words they're using. It tells you everything. The federal side is throwing around phrases like domestic terrorism and saying she tried to weaponize her vehicle. They're painting the agent as a defender, basically. But then you listen to the state and local leaders, and it's a completely different story. They're calling the agent's actions reckless and the federal story verifiably false. They cut right through all that official language and get to the bottom line. Somebody dying.
Okay, so let's dig into the federal government story first. Their version paints a picture of a highly trained agent who was facing a life-or-death situation. And this quote right here from Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, this is really the foundation of their whole argument. The moment she calls it domestic terrorism, the whole frame changes. Suddenly, it's not just about an agent defending himself, it's about national security. It casts Renee Good not as a citizen in an encounter with law enforcement, but as an enemy. And the feds build their case from there. They claim Good had been stalking and impeding officers all day, that she wouldn't get out of her car when they told her to. And then comes the key moment. They allege she weaponized her vehicle, trying to run an officer over. So in their version, the officer had no choice. He feared for his life, he fired defensive shots, just like he was trained to do, a textbook response, according to them. But that is only one side of the story. Back in Minnesota, officials weren't just disagreeing. They were going on the record publicly and basically calling the federal story a flat-out lie. Yeah, check this out. The governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, came out swinging. He didn't just say, well, we see it differently. No, he called the federal claims verifiably false. He straight up accused them of jumping to conclusions and trashing Renee Good's character before anyone had a chance to actually investigate. And the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, he put it even more bluntly. He just sliced right through all that talk of domestic terrorism and called it what he thought it was, a misuse of authority. To him, this was an agent recklessly using power, and the bottom line? Somebody dying. That's about as direct as an accusation can get. So as you can imagine, this public back and forth, it didn't stay a war of words for long. It escalated fast into a full-on bureaucratic showdown. And the prize? Control over the entire investigation. At first, everything seemed like it was going by the book. Minnesota's main investigative agency, the BCA, was supposed to team up with the FBI for a joint investigation. Standard procedure, right? Well, apparently not. the FBI suddenly did a complete 180. They cut the BCA off, denying them access to everything: case files, evidence, witness interviews, all of it. With the door slammed in their face, the state investigators had to, in their words, reluctantly withdraw. They were totally shut out.
And the head of the BCA laid it out pretty clearly. He said without access to the evidence, there's just no way they could conduct a thorough and independent investigation. So Minnesota's top cops, sidelined completely.
And this right here, this is the standoff in a nutshell. You have the Homeland Security Secretary saying, "Sorry, Minnesota, you have zero jurisdiction here. This is a federal investigation." But on the other side, you've got Governor Walz firing back, saying, "This happened on Minnesota soil. We have to be a part of this investigation." It's a classic fundamental clash over who's in charge. Now, this might just look like a turf war, just a bunch of government agencies fighting over who gets to be in charge. But who controls this investigation has huge, huge consequences for things like justice and transparency. I mean, think about it. The stakes are massive. If state investigators can't see the evidence, how can local prosecutors even think about pressing charges? Any potential lawsuit against the administration becomes extremely difficult, if not impossible. Governor Walz has said he thinks it's going to be very, very difficult to get a fair outcome here. And the city itself is worried this whole thing will just happen behind closed doors, with no transparency at all.
So all of this leaves us with a really big, unsettling question. This case really pulls back the curtain on a major crack in our system. When a city, a state, and the federal government have completely different versions of the truth, and one of those sides has all the power and all the evidence, who's left to hold them accountable?